Imagine the hot sun shining down on the flatlands of southern Iraq. Dry ground here holds secrets of old cities. Under the dust, civilization was born in a place called Sumer. Archaeologists gently uncover walls, temples, pots, tools, and jewelry. These echoes are from people who lived here over 5,000 years ago. The Sumerians were the first to build cities and write down their thoughts. Cities like Ur and Uruk show us how they learned to live well. Exploring these places is like stepping back to the beginning of city life. In the 1800s, explorers uncovered a new part of our human story, proving the Sumerians were real. What they did still matters, reminding us our story started a long time ago. Right here, civilization began to grow. So, who were these Sumerian people? They appeared in southern Mesopotamia between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Their language was unique, a puzzle for scholars. Some believe they were always there, others that they migrated. By 3500 BCE, they were already advanced, living in independent city-states. Each city had its own god and leader, but they shared a language, beliefs, and customs. The fertile land allowed for surplus food, enabling specialized jobs like craftsmen and priests. This division of labor marked the birth of civilization. The Sumerians organized themselves effectively, laying the groundwork for urban living. Their identity was rooted in their cities and settled lifestyle. Though their origins remain a mystery, their innovations transform society. They pioneered city living, leaving a legacy that forms the foundation of our modern world. One of the most amazing things the Sumerians gave us was writing. Just think about it, a world with no writing at all. No way to keep records, no books to read. Around 3200 BCE, they came up with something called cuneiform. It got its name because it was made of little wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay. When they first started, cuneiform used simple pictures to show things or ideas. But over time it changed. The marks started to stand for sounds, and that's when it became real written language. There was lots of clay around, so it was the perfect thing to write on. People called scribes would press these shapes into wet clay. Then, they'd let the clay dry or bake it hard. Thousands of these clay tablets have lasted all this time. They give us a peek into what Sumerian life was like. On them we find lists, official papers, poems, old stories, and songs to their gods. Scribes were very important people. Their skill in writing was needed to help run the cities and keep track of buying and selling. Because of writing, they could write down their laws. They could also save knowledge for later. Having all this knowledge written down helped them make even more new discoveries and improvements. Other groups of people who came later, like the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, also started using cuneiform. It was used for over 3,000 years. That just shows how clever it was. Coming up with writing changed people forever. It's what made it possible to even have history, letting us connect with how people thought so long ago. Because of cuneiform, it's like we can still hear the Sumerians speaking to us. Their way of writing is like the great-great-grandparent of all writing we have today. The story of writing started right here, in Sumer. The Sumerians were also amazing at math, way ahead of their time. They used a system based on the number 60. And guess what? We still use it today for telling time and measuring angles. Think about it, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. That idea came from the Sumerians. The number 60 can be divided by lots of other numbers. This made it easier to do math, especially with parts of numbers like fractions. The scribes used math for all sorts of things, like counting stuff they traded, measuring pieces of land, and planning big building projects. They even made multiplication tables, figured out math problems, and knew about shapes and spaces, which is geometry. Knowing all this math was super important for building their tall temples, called ziggurats, and for running their cities smoothly. The Sumerians also watched the stars. They started to study them to keep track of the seasons, and even to guess when floods might happen. The notes they kept about what they saw in the sky helped build the foundation for science later on. Math was a part of everyday life for them, from buying and selling things to ceremonies in their temples. We found clay tablets that show their smart calculations, and even homework from their schools. What they did in math affects everything from simple daily things to how we understand the stars. The Sumerians' way with numbers shaped their world, and it still shapes ours too. Their new ideas in math and stargazing still echo down to us today. From counting bricks for buildings to watching the stars, Sumer really did count it all. Living in Sumer wasn't always easy. They didn't have much stone or wood, but they had tons of mud. So, the Sumerians got creative. They turned that mud into bricks by drying them in the sun. And with those bricks, they built the very first real cities in the world. Places like Uruk, Ur, Eridu, and Lagash grew into busy, lively city centers. In the middle of every city, there was a big temple area, and the tallest thing there was a huge, stepped tower called a ziggurat. The ziggurat was important for their religion, but it was also a place where city business happened. It showed their belief in their gods and also their power. Priests took care of the temple's land and all its goods. This made the temples like important business centers too. The cities grew outwards from the temple. There were places for people to live, workshops for making things, busy markets, and buildings for running the city. They built strong mud brick walls around their cities to keep them safe from enemies and attackers. It took a lot of planning and teamwork to build these cities and keep them going. One city, Uruk, might have had up to 50,000 people living in it at one time. That was more people in one place than ever before. With so many people living close together, they needed new ways to govern themselves and new laws to keep order. The Sumerian city-states were like the first experiments in how to live in a city. The ways they figured out how to solve city problems are still ideas we think about today. How big and complicated the Sumerian cities were was totally new and changed everything. This is where people first learned how to live together in really large groups. You could say the city itself was Sumer's most amazing invention. What was daily life like in Sumer? Most Sumerians were farmers growing barley, wheat, and dates and raising sheep and cows. They built canals to water their crops, turning desert into farmland. Inside cities, skilled workers made things from clay, metal, and cloth. Merchants traded grain for wood and metal in busy marketplaces. Sumerian society had rulers, priests, officials, scribes, merchants, skilled workers, farmers, and slaves. Family was important. Marriages were arranged, and homes housed extended families. They ate simple food like barley bread, vegetables, dates, and fish, and drank beer. Despite a hard life, they enjoyed festivals, music, and stories. Sumerian cities were vibrant, balancing work, celebrations, and traditions. The Sumerians believed that powerful gods and goddesses made their world and controlled what happened in it. Each city had its own special god or goddess they looked up to, but they all believed in a big group of gods that connected all of Sumer. They had amazing stories called myths that explained how the universe began, where people came from, and why things in nature happened, like storms or sunshine. One of their stories says that humans were made from clay, and their job was to serve the gods. They also had wise sayings called proverbs. For example, one said, "Friendship might only last a day, but family connections last forever." These sayings show us what they thought was important, like family, not doing too much of anything, and being kind. These stories and sayings weren't just for fun. They helped teach people how to act and reminded them of what they believed. They had long, exciting stories like the story of Gilgamesh. These stories talked about big ideas like friendship, what happens when we die, and what life is all about. Through their stories, the Sumerians thought about life's biggest and hardest questions. What they wrote down helped them remember their culture and taught important lessons about right and wrong. These old stories still feel important today because they talk about things that are true for all people, everywhere. The stories and wise words from Sumer have lasted, and they help us understand what it means to be human. Their stories are like a bridge that connects us to people who lived thousands of years ago. Music was a big part of almost everything the Sumerians did. They had music during their religious ceremonies, at parties and festivals, and even while they did their daily chores. They believed music could make the gods happy, and also touch people's feelings deeply. People who study old things have found instruments like lyres, which are like small harps, as well as bigger harps, drums, and flutes. This shows they had a lively music scene. Some very fancy lyres found in a place called Ur were decorated with gold and beautiful blue stones. This tells us music was so important, they even wanted it in the afterlife. There were professional musicians who worked for the temples and for the rulers. They would play hymns and songs for all sorts of events. Music made their storytelling better, their ceremonies more special, and their celebrations more fun. We don't know exactly how their songs sounded, but the instruments they left behind and the words they wrote show us that music meant a lot to them. The Sumerians knew that music had a special power to bring people together and to connect them with their gods. The fact that they loved music so much is something that still echoes down to us today. Sadly, no group of people or way of life lasts forever. The Sumerian cities started to fight with each other, which made them weaker. Around 2350 BCE, a king named Sargon of Akkad conquered them. Even though another group was in charge, Sumerian ways of life continued to do well for a while. But they weren't in charge of themselves anymore. Later on, there was a time when Sumerian kings from a city called Ur became powerful again. but it didn't last very long. Problems with the land, like changes in the rivers and attacks from new groups of people, made things worse, faster. By about 2000 BCE, Sumer wasn't really its own separate civilization anymore, but the amazing things they did lived on. Other groups who came later, like the Babylonians and Assyrians, built on the ideas and inventions that the Sumerians started. Things like writing, laws, math, and stories spread from Sumer to many other parts of the Old World. The story of the Sumerians is really our story too. It's about how living in cities first began. The things they invented still affect how we live today. What Sumer left behind is like a bright sunrise that still helps us see and understand who we are. Their spirit is still alive in every city we live in, every word we write, and every time we use numbers.